the invisible teaching. In the mist-covered mountains, where the wind's whisper speaks louder than any human voice, there stood a monastery so ancient that not even the oldest trees could remember when it was built. There lived an old Zen master named Hakuin, known for his deep silence and for teaching without words. Many pilgrims climbed to that sacred place in search of answers. They brought books, incense, and their most urgent questions. But the master would only look at them, sometimes offer a gentle smile, and gesture silently toward the rock garden. He never spoke, yet those who descended from the mountain often claimed they had understood something they could never put into words. One day, a young monk named Rin arrived. He came from a distant temple, carrying with him years of study, effort, and doubt. His intention was clear. He sought true wisdom, the kind not found in books, the kind that lies beyond thought. He had heard whispers of Master Hakuin's invisible teaching. Rin bowed before the master, as tradition demanded, and said, "Master, I have traveled a long road for you to teach me. I'm ready to unlearn everything I know." The old man looked at him, rose slowly, and began walking toward the pond in the garden without uttering a word. Ren, confused yet respectful, followed. And so his first lesson began. Without words, without explanations, only footsteps in silence, among stones, bamboo, and wind. Master Hakuin stopped by the pond. The water was so clear that the bottom could be seen in perfect detail. Smooth stones, golden koi gliding with elegance, and fallen leaves floating like thoughts with no owner. Rin stood beside him, waiting for instruction. But the master simply gazed at the reflection of the sky on the water's surface. A crow called out in the distance. The wind rustled through the bamboo stalks. "Should I look at the pond?" the young monk asked. There was no reply. Silence stretched like a shadow slipping across the ground at sunset. Uncertain, Ren sat down. He took a deep breath. Minutes passed, perhaps hours. The master remained still, watching the water as if reading a secret scripture hidden in the reflections. Then Ren noticed something. His mind, restless at first, had begun to settle. He was no longer thinking about his quest, nor his questions, nor the answers he had hoped to find. He was simply there, present, with no need to understand. At that very moment, the old master turned and looked him in the eye. He said nothing. He only nodded. And in that voiceless gesture, Ren felt something inside him open, like a flower he hadn't known was closed. The invisible teaching is not explained. It is revealed. In the days that followed, Master Hakuin did not speak a single word. Each morning at dawn, he would leave the temple and walk the forest path. Rin followed him like a silent shadow. Together, they crossed wooden bridges, paused before fallen branches, observed insects working the soil, and listened to the sounds of the world without interfering. There were no questions, no answers, only presence. First, Rin felt anxious. Was this some kind of test? Where were the koans, the teachings, the instructions? But in time, he began to notice the smallest details, the kind his racing mind would have missed before. How the dew clung to a leaf without fear of falling. How the wind bent the pines without breaking them. How the master breathed, deep and calm, as if his lungs were tied to the very heartbeat of the mountain. Rin began to imitate him, not with the intention of learning, but because something within his own body began to ask for it. One morning, as they watched a butterfly settle on a white flower, Rin whispered, "Is this the invisible teaching?" Master Hakuin didn't even look at him. He simply exhaled softly, and the butterfly took flight. And Rin understood, not everything that is learned needs to be said. The essential is not found in words, but in the space between them. Winter arrived slowly. The leaves shed their green, the air grew thin and cold, and footsteps began to crunch against the frozen earth. But the master's rhythm remained unchanged. He kept walking, observing, breathing. Ren followed him each day, no longer expecting anything, no longer resisting what was. One afternoon, as snow began to fall, Hakuin stopped in front of a barren tree. He pointed to it with one finger, then turned around and walked back without a word. Ren stayed behind, looking at it. There were no leaves, no flowers, only naked branches reaching toward the sky like open hands. It looked like a dead tree, but something in its shape, something in its silent dignity, deeply moved the young monk. In the stillness of that moment, he understood. The tree does not need adornment to be wise. It does not speak, yet it teaches. It accepts the cold, the loss, the emptiness, because it knows spring will come. That night, in his cell, Ren traced words into the snow with his finger. The invisible teaches when we stop searching for the visible. And for the first time since his arrival, he slept without thoughts, without questions, without longing, only with silence, embraced by the stillness of a truth that needed no form. Weeks passed. The silence between master and disciple was no longer a barrier, but a bridge. Each gesture, each pause, each glance shared beneath the open sky became a lesson in itself. Ren no longer needed answers because he had stopped asking questions. He simply lived, sweeping the courtyard, gathering firewood, watching the shadows move with the sun. He began to discover that true wisdom isn't something to be reached, but something that dissolves into you once the ego steps aside. One morning, while drawing water from the well, a stone slipped and fell to the bottom. The sound echoed deep below, vibrating through the silence of the monastery. Ren stood still, listening to the long echo, and in that moment he understood. The mind is also a well. When a stone of awareness is dropped, what echoes back is truth. That night, as they meditated together beneath the full moon, Hakuin finally spoke. His voice deep like wind between mountains. What you've learned, no one can take from you, because you didn't learn it. You remembered it. Ren bowed his head, moved. He felt no pride. There had been no grand illumination, only a steady calm, like a tree that knows it is exactly where it belongs. And that was enough.
The next morning, Master Hakuin did not come out of his room. The sun lit the snow-covered rooftops. The birds sang among the pines. But the master's door remained closed. Ren, faithful to the teaching he had received, did not grow restless. He prepared tea, swept the garden, gathered firewood, used as he did every day. The silence, once a mystery, had become his home. As evening approached, a younger man came to him and asked, "Aren't you worried about the master? We haven't seen him all day." Ren smiled gently. He is still teaching, even now. Not everyone knows how to read his silence. When night fell, Ren sat in front of the master's door. Not to ask. Not to what. Used to be. His breath was like waves across a calm lake. Within him, there was no anxiety. No need to understand anything more. And in that moment, he grasped the deepest of all invisible lessons. The true master is not there to be followed, but to awaken you to yourself. The entire journey Ren had taken to the monastery. All the silence, the doubt, the cold, the hours without words, were not trials. They were mirrors. The invisible teaching was never in Hakuin. It was in him.
That night was the clearest of the entire winter. The moon hung directly above the temple roof, round and silent, like a truth that needs no explanation. Ren remained in meditation until the cold numbed his legs. He felt no pain, no hope, only complete presence, as if he himself had vanished, and in his place remained the pure space that embraces everything. Suddenly, the master's door creaked open. Hakuin appeared, wrapped in his robe, his face serene, as if he had always been there. He said nothing. He simply sat beside Ren. Together, they gazed into the open sky, without thought, without purpose, simply being. After a long silence, the master raised his hand and pointed to a solitary star. "That which you see," he said softly, "shines without knowing it shines." Ren nodded, his eyes moist. In that star he recognized his journey, his ignorance, his surrender, his awakening. "The invisible teaching," Ren whispered, "is the art of emptying oneself." The master smiled. "And even more, it is the art of not knowing you have learned." The wind stirred gently, carrying those words away, like leaves drifting with no destination. Because in Zen, the most valuable truths are not those we hold on to, but those we let go of without fear. And Ren understood what he had searched for all these years, had always lived within him. The master had only shown him a clear mirror where his soul could see itself bare, and that was enough. As time passed, Ren made the decision to leave the monastery, not out of rejection nor out of need, simply because he knew the moment had come. What needed to bloom had already blossomed. What needed to die had already faded. He bowed to Master Hakuin one last time. The old man said nothing. He only looked at him with eyes that had already seen everything, and that gaze was deeper than any words. Ren descended the same path he had once climbed, but this time he was no longer the same. The trail seemed different, though the trees were the same, not because the world had changed, but because his eyes were no longer colored by seeking, judgment, or desire. Each step was light, each moment enough. In the villages he passed through, people began to call him the monk who does not teach. He would sit with elders in silence, sweep streets no one asked him to sweep, or stare at a fire for hours. When someone asked about his doctrine, he would simply smile. "I have no doctrine. I only learned to listen to what has no form." And so, with no temple and no disciples, Ren became a master without intending to be, because one who has received the invisible teaching has no need to proclaim it. It lives in the way he is present, in the way he is silent, in the way he sees without judgment, loves without holding, and leaves without leaving emptiness behind. One night, while walking along the river, he saw his reflection in the water. He no longer recognized himself as before. He was not the student, not the monk, not even the man who once sought. He was the river. He was the sky. He was the silence. And at last, he felt at home.